Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a reading wrap-up video and I'm so excited for this. I love doing wrap-ups. I don't know why I love doing wrap-ups so much. I just love talking about the books that I read. It's just fun for me. That's kind of why I started this channel to begin with, is because I like discussing the books that I read, but I feel like I don't have anyone to discuss them with in real life because, you know, no one reads the same books that I read, and so talking about the books and like venting about books is like what's fun to me, and that's why I made this channel. So that's why I really love these videos so much. But yeah, I feel like I have a lot of good books to share with you guys this time, but I also have a couple not so good books that I read, and I'm excited to talk about them because some of the books are very, very popular books, and I'm probably going to go into a little bit of spoilers, so it's going to be kind of fun. So, okay guys, so the first book I'm going to talk about is a book that I had on my want to read list for a while. It was something that I was interested in reading for a long time, and I ended up picking it up, and it's called The Loneliest Girl in the Universe by Lauren James. And this is like a sci-fi YA novel, and I heard a lot of really great things about this book and that this book is really good for introverts, and I would definitely agree. This book is like the perfect example of like an introvert's dream. The girl in this book is basically on a spaceship flying to this planet that can support human beings and like the human species, and she's on this ship alone because her parents were put on this ship to go to this new planet and kind of like inhabit this new planet. And what ended up happening was her parents ended up getting pregnant, and it was the girl in this book. What is her name? Romy is her name? Yeah, Romy. But what ended up happening was like this big accident happened, and like everybody died pretty much except for her. So now she is alone on the ship by herself as like a teenager, flying to this new planet that's like miles and miles and miles and miles away. So she's been on this ship for years. I think she has like 50 years left to be on this ship alone by herself, and so she's basically just chilling in space alone, and she's gonna have to inhabit this planet alone with these embryos and everything like that. Well, one day she gets this email from this guy who is going to meet her because the technologies are better and his spaceship is faster, so he's going to be able to get to her faster, and then they're going to be able to kind of team up. They'll be able to take his ship the rest of the way to the planet, and it's going to be like a much quicker trip, so she's not going to have to spend 50 years alone on the ship anymore. She's going to have like somebody to be with her and stuff. And that's kind of like the basis of the story. So then she kind of like, her and this guy are like emailing each other and getting to know each other before they meet up, and she's really excited to finally have somebody with her so she's not as lonely anymore. So this book kind of feels like a fever dream. Like I don't really remember reading it, but like I kind of remember liking it, but then I kind of remember like not liking it, having a hard time remembering what I liked and what I didn't like about it. It's just like one of those books that you read and then it like leaves your brain the second that you finish it. That is what this book was for me. So one thing I can say is this book is very short, and so I feel like because it was short, and I feel like sometimes with like sci-fi, having like short books can be a little bit hard because I feel like you are missing a lot of really important information and like explanations on like how things work and why things work the way that they do. And I feel like in a way this book did struggle with that, and so there was definitely times where I was like, I don't think that's how it would have happened, or like why did it happen that way? That doesn't make any sense. They wouldn't have done that. Like she didn't give explanations for certain things that needed explanations, you know what I mean? But I can say that a couple of the things that I was annoyed with and some of the stuff that I was like questioning and going like, why did she write it like that? Like it did get answered, or it did make a little bit more sense at the end as to why she wrote certain things the way that they were, even though they didn't make sense like at the beginning, you know what I mean? But yeah, I would say that this book was okay. It's definitely like a certain type of vibe. If you're an introvert and you can like relate to this girl's story, like what would it be like to be on a spaceship for like 50 years alone? Like what would that be like? Because it goes into a lot of like her day-to-day life and like what she did and like what she did to like entertain herself and stuff like that. I thought that was really, really interesting. And like there's some interesting kind of twists that happen, and I would say it's like a decent book, but I'm not gonna say it's like a life-changing book. Like it's not like you have to read this like now. The other thing about this book that I think is funny, and I think that you guys will know what I mean when I say this, like the best way for me to explain this is like, you know when you watch like a sci-fi show from like the 1980s and they are trying to create like what the world would be like in like 2060, but it's like this weird 1970s or 1980s version of 2060. It's like you can tell it's like the 70s version of like the future. That's what this book feels like. It feels like it's like the 2018 version of 2060. Like she still uses like iPads and stuff, and I'm like, I feel like the technology would be like more advanced, where like if it was made into a movie you'd be like, why does this feel like oddly like dated? Even though it's supposed to be like the future, you know what I mean? So that's kind of what I felt like with this book, with some like the technology and stuff like that. But I do think that the author is a scientist, like she has a science background, so in that sense I feel like she did an okay job at like explaining things and stuff. But yeah, I would say I think I gave this 3 stars. I think it wasn't bad by any means, but it wasn't like amazing either. I feel like there definitely could have been some things that could have been written a little bit better, if you know what I mean. So the next book is The Last Conversation by Paul Tremblay. This was another book in the Forward series that Blake Crouch curated, and I talked a little bit about 3 of them in my last video, or 2 of them? 2 or 3, I can't remember. But this was one that I thought I was gonna like, but I actually didn't love this one either. This one was kind of confusing. Like, I didn't really understand the end. Like, you know when you get to the end of a book sometimes and you're like, wait, like, I don't understand this. Like, I feel like I'm supposed to get it, but like I don't get it. Like, I felt like this book made me feel stupid. Like I was like missing something, and yeah, that's kind of how I felt with this book. So, and to be honest, like I don't even remember this story very well either. Like this one kind of left my brain. And so, yeah, I remember I liked it more than Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin, which is why I gave it 3 stars, but I feel like it was a pretty forgettable story. I didn't feel really attached to the characters. Like I said, I felt confused at the end, and I still feel like I like Blake Crouch's piece the most. I don't even know if I'm gonna finish this series, to be honest. Most of the reason why I started reading this series was because I wanted to read Blake Crouch's, and then once I read it, I was like, well, I might as well read all the other ones, but I don't know if I'm going to finish it. I think I'm gonna stop at Blake Crouch's and enjoy it, and then maybe move on from this series, because I haven't been very happy with the other ones outside of Blake Crouch's. So the next book I have a whole vlog about, so if you guys watch that, then you kind of know my thoughts on this, but I'm going to talk about it really quickly if you guys didn't watch that vlog. But it is Sarah J Maas, A Court of Silver Flames. I love this book, you guys. This book was so good. Like, I am a Cassian stan. I've been obsessed with Cassian since like he was introduced. He's always been my favorite character, and there's just something about him that I love. Like, he just strikes me as like the type of guy that's like protective and strong and like powerful, and also very loving. Like, he would just like love you so much. You know what I mean? He's like that really perfect like mix of like warrior guy mixed with like softy, and that's what I love about Cassian so much. I still don't love Cassian and Nesta together. I don't think I'm gonna be like a full-on Nesta Cassian stan. I just can't fully get behind the coupling. And the one thing that I wish this book had in it more was more like sweetness in their relationship. I kind of felt like I was missing that like sweetness that I feel like it needed. Like, I feel like Cassian, like I said, has that sweet side to him where he just wants to like spoil somebody. Like, there's an element to Cassian where I feel like he is such a softie, but I didn't get that with him in this book. And it's because Nesta is such a harsh person, and like Nesta wouldn't want that softy side to him, but I felt like I missed it. Like, there was some sweetness missing from their romance. It was like very sexual, and like the more like steamy scenes are great. Like, I'm not gonna like whine about that, but I feel like the thing that really sets off steamy scenes and makes them really good and like satisfying is when there's like that really sweet romance element to it as well. And like, don't get me wrong, I love a good like hate to love, like that sexual tension, you know, where you're just like, it's like that build up, that slow burn, but after the slow burn is over, I want that cuteness, and it just missed some cuteness. So that was my only complaint. But other than that, you know, mental illness rep, the rep for depression and anxiety and like PTSD was so well done. Like, it was so good, the way that Sarah J Maas wrote Nesta's character. Like, I love a character that you like don't fully love, but you also love and understand. A good example of that would be Evelyn Hugo. Like, you don't love Evelyn Hugo completely, but you can understand her. She feels like a real person. Like, she's nuanced. Like, if you have siblings, like, you don't love everything about your siblings. They annoy you a lot, but you still love them as your sibling, and you would do anything for them. Like, I feel like that is what she succeeded with Nesta, is making you dislike her but also like her at the same time, and I feel like that's a really hard thing to do, and she did it really well with her character in this book. So props to Sarah J Maas. Love her as an author. I know that's controversial, but whatever, I love her. So the next 2 books I read were Shadow and Bone and Siege and Storm. So I was not going to read these books. I was not planning on reading these. I wanted to read Six of Crows really, really bad, but I always thought, I'm just going to skip out on Six of Crows. Like, I know it's good, but I don't want to read Shadow and Bone. Like, I just had no desire to read Shadow and Bone. So I kind of just decided I wasn't going to read it, and I was fine with that. But then the Shadow and Bone series obviously is coming out on TV, and I was like, just do it, Kara. Just try it. Just see if you like it. Maybe you'll really like it. Who knows? And so I just spontaneously downloaded it onto my Kindle, and I started reading it. And I have mixed feelings on this series, okay? So the first book, Shadow and Bone, I actually really liked it, okay? One thing that I absolutely loved about this first book was Leigh Bardugo's ability to tell the story and build a world at the same time. I feel like that's so hard, especially for fantasy, is authors always struggle with telling a story while they're simultaneously building the world because they feel like they have to build the world first to help you understand the world. It was such a success in that way, and I loved it because I had no idea actually what the series was about. I didn't realize that there was like a fold and so when I went into this book, I was instantly drawn in, for one, and I feel like she just unfolded this world so fluidly. It was perfectly well done, and I loved that about this book because I was very intrigued with this world and the plot at the same time. Loved it. And I was also so curious about the stag because I'd seen the stag in the trailer and I was like, what is a stag? I'm curious. And so I loved seeing what the stag thing and the stag storyline was about. And I honestly thought Shadow and Bone was a pretty decent book. Now, I probably would have given this book 4 stars, but I had to take away a star, and I'm about to tell you why. Now, this is going to be a spoiler, so I'm going to put spoiler down here or down here on the side. When you don't see it here anymore, it means I'm done talking about it, but I really want to talk about this because I know a lot of you guys have probably read this book, so I'm going to spoil it. So the thing that bothered me so much about this book, and the reason why I took away 1 star, it was the same reason why I gave Children of Blood and Bone 3 stars, because the author did the exact same thing in that book that this author did in this book. Throughout the entire story, we learn that if you kill the stag and you put it around your neck, you have control of your powers, right? If somebody else kills the stag and puts the thing around your neck, they have control of your powers. That is what the storyline was for a majority of the story. So that is what you believe, that the Darkling kills the stag, and so he puts the thing around her neck, he has control of her powers. That was the storyline. Don't go changing it on me. And one of my biggest pet peeves in the world is when an author brings something new and random up in a storyline to conveniently write them out of a problem. So what ended up happening was they're in the fold and she has the stag thing around her neck and the Darkling has control of her powers, but then she realizes out of the blue, just out of nowhere, that she actually has control of her powers too, because she spared the stag's life. And because she spared the stag's life, she now has control of her powers as well. And then it just gets her out of the situation and everything's fine and dandy. And I'm like, what? No. You basically just canceled out everything that you had said before. You canceled out the entire plot line of this entire book because Alina all of a sudden has powers that you said she couldn't have. But now she has them because she just happened to spare his life. So lazy, so convenient, and so stupid. It pissed me off. I hated it. But that was the only thing in that book that really pissed me off. Alina and what's his name? Mal? I actually like Mal. I think Mal's a pretty decent character. I know that a lot of people don't really like him that much, but I kind of like him. I think he's kind of one of those complicated characters where, Alina all of a sudden is really important, but he still really loves her, but he doesn't really know where his place is anymore, and he's trying to support her as best as he can, but he kind of feels like he doesn't know where his path is going. He quit the army so he could support her, but now he misses it, and I think Mal is a very unique character that's trying to be as supportive as he can, but is having a hard time kind of finding his place, and I think people are too mean to Mal. Then I read Siege and Storm. Not a fan of Siege and Storm, I gave it 2 stars. There wasn't really any particular reason I didn't like Siege and Storm. I honestly just got really, really bored. I kind of felt like this book had the second book syndrome where nothing really happens. It's just a lot of talking and a lot of doing nothing. By the end of Siege and Storm, I literally was just skimming it because I was so bored and so ready for the book to be over. I just didn't feel like anything was happening. And I was just bored to tears with Siege and Storm, and I'm not really sure why that was. I don't know if other people felt the same way, but I just could not get into Siege and Storm, and it was painful for me to read. And I kind of felt do I really want to read Moon and Rising? I don't know. I feel like I should because I read the first 2. I should just finish it off and read it and kind of see what it's about, but I don't know. Let me know if you guys think I should read Moon and Rising. Is there some crazy big twist that happens that I need to read, or something that's really crazy that I need to read? Because right now I just don't really have any desire to read it because of how much I didn't like Siege and Storm. One thing though that I'm actually curious about is whether the Darkling changes in Moon and Rising, because I don't understand why people like the Darkling. When I first started reading this book, I know that a lot of people were like, oh, I love the Darkling. I'm totally all for the Darkling. And so I was like, oh, it's probably gonna be me. Like, I'm probably gonna like the Darkling because I tend to like the more villainy love interests, the darker love interests. Like, I was a Damon person, like I really like Damon. But now that I'm reading these, I'm like, why would somebody like the Darkling? There's like nothing likable about him. He's like a straight villain. Like, does he make like a big switch in the last book? Is he actually not a villain? Like, that's what I'm really curious about, because people are still such like Darkling stans, and I'm over here like, why? Like, I see no redeeming qualities in the Darkling. So I don't know, maybe I should read Ruin and Rising, but that's kind of my thoughts. So this is a book I got from my library, and it's Ink and Water, an illustrated memoir, How I Kicked Anorexia's Ass and Embraced Body Positivity. I had never heard of it before, like ever. And if you don't follow my other channel, then you probably don't know this about me, but I had anorexia really badly about 15 years ago, and I had to be hospitalized and like the whole shebang. It was not a fun time, but I ended up recovering and getting better, and I'm completely fine now. But I'm always interested in other people's like stories of recovery from anorexia and like how it went and how it happened and what helped them, what pulled them out of it, because I was able to pull myself out of mine. So how did other people find that strength? I just find fascinating. And this girl actually lives in Portland, Oregon, which is kind of where my eating disorder recovery unfolded. So I felt like I was like almost reading my own story in a way, because there's like a lot of pictures of Portland, and I'm like, oh, I know where that is. Like, I know where that is. And so it was really, really interesting. And I think that this book is phenomenal. I think that everybody should read this. It's an amazing graphic novel. Even if you've never struggled with an eating disorder, I think it shows a lot of strength, and it shows somebody that like falls but gets back up again, and falls and gets back up again, and like finds the strength within her to like keep fighting and to keep going. And I think that that's really inspirational, because recovery from anything is not like a fluid, easy thing. Like, you're not ever going to recover from like an addiction or anything without having setbacks. And this shows what it looks like to fall, make mistakes, have huge setbacks, but then find it within yourself to like keep going and to like keep pushing forward and to find yourself on the other side. And I think that's so inspirational, and I just think that this book was so well done. I wouldn't say that it's my favorite art. I wasn't a huge fan of the art, if we're being honest, but the story was so good, like the art didn't even matter. And I feel like it's so rare for me to get really attached to characters in graphic novels, because graphic novels are so fast and there's not a lot of like character building, I feel like, sometimes in graphic novels. But this one I actually felt like did a really good job at character building. You felt for her friends, you felt for her, you understood the story really well, you didn't ever feel lost, which sometimes I feel like is common with graphic novels as well, is sometimes I feel a little bit lost because they're trying to tell the story so fast. But this was like such a good book. It was so fluid and just very well told, and I highly recommend it. Like, if you want a good graphic novel, I gave this 5 stars. It definitely deserves more hype. It was amazing. So guys, what some of the art looks like, so you guys can kind of see. I mean, it's not horrible. Sometimes with graphic novels, I don't like it when there's too much writing on each page. Like, each bubble is like these huge paragraphs. I prefer it when the writing is just told like a little bit quicker with smaller bubbles. I don't know why I like that. And this definitely had that element as well. So highly recommend it. This was phenomenal. 5 stars. So next up is Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. And the second I saw this book talked about on BookTube, I wanted to read it. I thought that the storyline sounded so unique, and I was so curious about it. Like, you know when you just hear a synopsis and you're like, that's for me. Like, I want to read that. It sounds just so good, totally up my alley. So this is about a girl who is like in her late 20s. She just got her PhD in astronomy, and she is like really, really smart. She was such a hard worker all through school, and she just wanted to be successful. She's like a very, very type A person, and she graduates, and it's kind of like her story about like what you do after you graduate. Like, after you've focused like 10 years of your life on one thing and like being successful and graduating and like reaching your goal, what do you do after that? It's like you have to find like a whole new version of yourself, like what it is that you're gonna work for. What do you want to do now? Like, you have to almost find like this new goal and this new version of yourself. And I think that this is like an element to adulthood that not a lot of people talk about. Like, what do you do after like a huge chapter of your life is over? And this book goes into detail about like that part of adulthood, which I loved. I think that was like my favorite part about this book, because I feel like it's so relatable. and the author did a really good job with that element alone. But the main kind of like synopsis that this book kind of throws at you is that she ends up going to Vegas to kind of celebrate her graduation. And while she's in Vegas, she ends up meeting this girl, and they end up getting married in Vegas, like drunk and married. And the next morning, her wife leaves her a note and says, like, if you want to get in touch with me, like, call me or text me. If you want to get this annulled, like, just let me know. And she just leaves a note. So it's basically like their relationship. You can kind of see it unfold, like what happens. Honestly, that's what I was most interested in when I picked up this book, but it was the thing that I was the least interested in when I read it. Like, I feel like that was like how this book was sold, but it was kind of like just one element of this story, but it wasn't an element that I really cared about. And I think that that's kind of an area where the author failed with this, is I did not really care about her girlfriend, Yuki. I feel like I needed to care, but like I didn't care. Like, in a way, I kind of felt like the relationship that kind of blossomed in this book was a little bit on the toxic side. Like, there was something about this relationship that felt a little toxic, but I can't put my finger on why. So here's, I think, the problem with the relationship that I had, and I've seen this happen in books before. So Morgan Rogers has like a beautiful way of writing. She has kind of more flowery prose and stuff like that, which is great. And I actually like that type of writing when you're writing it through like the narrator's perspective. But once you get into the dialogue parts, you can't really use that type of writing because it just doesn't feel natural and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And what I kind of felt like happened with this book was she was trying to make Yuki, the love interest, like the manic pixie dream girl type of character. And so what happened was she was trying to make her like quotable, right? Her dialogue came across as kind of vague and like metaphorical and quotable, to where you kind of felt like they didn't have good communication, because you always kind of felt like they were like vaguely speaking to each other, like, well, sometimes we just blah, 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 and then they like walk out the door and you're like, huh? Nobody talks like that. Like, that didn't feel natural, and it just kind of felt like they weren't having good communication because the dialogue wasn't natural. I think that that was my issue. I just wasn't fully invested in this couple, and it just felt a little bit forced to me. Like, I was supposed to really, really root for them, but there was just something about it that was missing for me. Like, they just didn't feel like they made like the best match. But I can say that I really love the plotline of like the adult kind of going into a new chapter of their life. That was really, really fantastically done, and I'm glad that she wrote that, because I think it's an element of adulthood that we don't get to talk about very often, but I think it's extremely relatable. So I liked this book, but there was definitely elements about it that I didn't love. You can go check out my review on Goodreads, because I think I go into a little bit more detail about things. So the next book is Being Lolita by Allison Wood. My cousin actually let me borrow this book. She read it and she gave it to me to read, and this book is a really, really, really good and definitely more hard-hitting book. I gave this book 5 stars, and it's basically her story about how she was groomed as a high school student to basically be in a relationship with her teacher. And he groomed her by using the book Lolita. And he would read it with her, and he kind of taught her that it was like this beautiful romance and that it was like this beautiful love story. And he ended up being very abusive and not a good guy at all. And because she was so young, she didn't understand like what was happening. And it was really, 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 really well done. Like, and the way that he used Lolita to manipulate her, I thought was really interesting. Like, he would say things to her like, Lolita was the one in control. Lolita had the power in this relationship. Like, she knew that she had the power, and she knew that she was seducing him. So he was almost saying like, Lolita was the one with the power, Lolita was the one seducing him. And so it was almost like he was putting their relationship in her hands, like, it's you who's seducing me, so it's not him doing it to her type of thing. And so he would kind of manipulate her in that way. And I think it's so interesting because, you know, when you're 18, I think as a 35-year-old now, like, I'm older, I can look back and like relate a lot to her as an 18-year-old. Like, I think she used a lot of really interesting ways of like describing things in a very relatable way. Like, when you're 17, 18 years old, like, you think you are just so grown, right? Like, you understand the world, you understand things, and like, you just feel so old. And then you get to be like 30 years old and you're like, I was a baby at 18. I was so clueless. You think you know everything, but you don't know everything. And I think she really portrayed that really, really well in this book. Like, at the time, I thought I was so knowledgeable about what was happening. but I was like not, and that's why I was so easily groomed. And I thought that there was a really interesting scene where she talks about how she went over to his apartment and he asked her what kind of alcohol she wanted to drink, but she like never drank alcohol before and she didn't know what to ask for, so she said a Cosmo because she watched Sex and the City a couple times and that was like the only name of a drink that she knew, so she said Cosmo, and so he made her a Cosmo and that was like her drink every time she'd go over to his house. But I thought it was really interesting how she said Cosmo because she didn't know any drinks and she just watched it on Sex and the City and said, I'll just have like a Cosmo, because she didn't want to look like a baby. She didn't want to look young, like she didn't know anything or know anything about the world, so she was always trying to put on this front of like not looking young. I could just relate to that. Like I could see myself as an 18-year-old in this position and like feeling a lot of the same things that she was feeling at the time, you know what I mean? And the other great thing about this book is it's not very long. She just gets to the point. She doesn't use like unnecessary filler to like make her book longer. She tells you the story and that's it, which made this book really good, really entertaining, and really, not entertaining, but interesting, because you didn't ever feel like she was just giving you unnecessary filler. I highly recommend this. I gave it 5 stars. Obviously there's a lot of trigger warnings in this, but it's really good, and I think that she did a fantastic job with this book. So last but not least is All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover, and I actually had no idea what to expect with this novel. I did not realize this novel was about what it was about. So trigger warnings for like infertility and miscarriage, because this is basically what this book is about. It is about a girl's and a woman's struggle with infertility. It's like her dream to be a mother. That's all she wants in life, is to be a mom, and she marries like her like soulmate, right? And this book goes like from past to present. So you'll get a chapter of them meeting, then you'll get a chapter in the current times where they're having troubles because she can't conceive and she feels so guilty and sad and depressed, and then you'll go back in time to, you know, when they met again. So you can kind of see what their dynamic was in the past and how in love they were and how perfect they were for each other. And then you can see the problems that they have, you know, in the current time. And I think it was so important to do the story like that because you really started to care about this relationship and you really saw how close they were at the beginning, and it made you really feel for this couple in their hardships because you were rooting for them because you saw how compatible they were at the beginning. And this book is so well done because of that. And there was this moment in the middle of the book where I was like, oh, like I don't really feel super strongly about this couple. Like I don't really feel like I'm like feeling this couple that much. And then something happens. I'm not gonna spoil it, but it's like this moment where I was like, oh my God. I realized in that moment like how much I cared about this couple, how much I like cared about the guy kind of and like the girl, and how could this happen? Like I felt like what had happened to her happened to me. I could feel the pain that she would have gone through in that moment. And the reason why I was able to feel that was because of the past and present perspectives. And I was telling Travis about this and he goes, that means she's like a really good writer. Like if she can make you feel how the main character would feel like it's happening to you, like that makes a really good writer. And I was like, I know, because like I really did feel her pain, you know what I mean? It's a really good book. Like I said, this is very heavy in like the infertility miscarriage thing, so it's a big trigger warning. Like it's on page and everything, that you're seeing everything happen, but it's a really good book. Like I really recommend it. It's really hard to talk about this book, I feel like, without spoiling it, because I feel like there's certain things that I could see with this book being problematic for girls reading this if they're in like a really abusive relationship. Like I feel like this book could like make them think things about their relationship, and it could be like, okay, some relationships can work, some relationships can't work, some relationships are worth fighting for, some relationships aren't worth fighting for. You know what I mean? Like you have to really understand that like relationships are nuanced, and just because like one couple can work through something hard doesn't mean like every couple should try to work through something hard. You know what I mean? Other relationships you shouldn't. Like you need to leave that relationship. And I feel like this might put like a false sense of reality into certain people's heads that are in a really bad relationship. Like this would be like, see, all you have to do is forgive, all you have to do is work through it and everything will be fine, when that's not really always true. Also, I think a reason why I really like this book is because I'm not really like a black and white thinker. I'm somebody that tends to be very nuanced in my thinking. Like everything needs to be looked at situationally. Everything needs to be looked at in context and intention, and I don't think that things are black and white very often, right? And I think that this book was such a good example of like nuance and how important it is to be aware of the gray areas in everything, especially in relationships. Like, not one person holds sole responsibility for why a relationship breaks down. It's a dynamic. Like, I do agree that it's like certain things that happen in this book are very, 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 very unforgivable. But are there situations where it could be a little grayer? Maybe you could forgive. And is this a situation where maybe there's some nuance there? I don't know. That's kind of up to the reader to kind of decide. But I think she did a good job at kind of making those certain topics more debatable in this, which I really, really like when authors can do that. Another good example of this would be All the Ugly and Wonderful Things. Great book for like nuance and gray areas, because that book was like very controversial, but really great for discussion. You know what I mean? I think that this would be an interesting book for discussion, but like I said, hard hitter. It's a hard hitter. Lots of trigger warnings in this, just so you guys know. So that is it, guys. I feel like I talked for a really long time about these books. I don't know why. Like, I talked for a long time about like every single one of these. I'm sorry in advance. This is gonna be a long video, but whatevs. I'm sure you guys don't mind, so hopefully you grabbed a snack, but I'll talk to you guys in my next video. I hope you guys like this, and right now I'm reading From Blood and Ash, so if you guys want to join in, definitely pick it up and start reading it with me. We can talk about it in the next wrap-up video, and I think that's it, guys. So I'll talk to you soon, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.